Coming up on Getting Real to Heal with Dr. Grace.
Everything changed at the age of 7. And I got in the car and he said, "We're not going trick-or-treating. We're going to Jordan." So as we're driving, I'm questioning him. He's getting upset with me and just telling me everything will be fine. But everything was not fine.
Welcome to a place where we discover the freedom and healing found only in Jesus Christ. Through powerful stories, our guests tell how He turns pain into peace, rewrites lives, and restores the wholeness only He can give. This is Getting Real to Heal with Dr. Grace.
Welcome to Getting Real to Heal with Dr. Grace. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today's topic is called Healing of the Father-Daughter Wound. So many of us have grown up with dads that have been emotionally unavailable to us, or perhaps even hurt or betrayed us in some ways, and that definitely can leave a negative impact and shape a young woman's or even a young man's character and bringing up. And so today, my special guest, Lauren Burns, she is going to share her remarkable story of being rescued after her father had kidnapped her at the age of 7 and moved her to the Middle East. Lauren Burns, she is a speaker, author, and host of the Redeemed podcast, and she's also a physical therapist. She lives in San Antonio with her husband, Brett, of 20 years, and they have 2 boys, Caleb and Cooper. Welcome to the show, Lauren.
Thank you so much for having me. I love going back to my East Texas roots, so this is exciting.
Yes. So Lauren, tell us a little bit about how your mom and your dad met.
So they met in the Dallas area suburb. Richardson is where I was born and grew up my early years. My mom's from Florida, near Destin, the beautiful beaches. And my father is from Jordan. Jordan's near Israel. And my mom came to Texas just wanting a different, adventure in her life in her young 19, 20. And my father came to the Dallas area to start working and go to school. And so they met at sort of like a Denny's type of restaurant. She was a waitress, he was a cook, and they started dating and fell in love. And he's Muslim, my mom's Christian, but when you're 19, 20 years old, you're not thinking about those things, possibly. And so she wasn't that concerned about the religious difference. And so things were good. They were dating, fell in love, and got married. And about 4 years later, my mom was pregnant with me, their first child.
Okay. So your parents, being of different faiths, did they practice their faiths separately, or were they more culturally Muslim? Or, if your mom, did she attend church, and did she bring you to church when you were very little?
Good question. Some of that I don't remember. I had a lot of trauma in my life that we'll get into. So I feel like because of those having trauma in my life at a young age, some of my memories are a little fuzzy. But they went before I was born. My dad did not really practice his religion much. My mom was going to church off and on, and my dad didn't have an issue with that. My father was not really practicing his religion until he became a father. And when he became a father, and I think, I can resonate with that as well. When I became a mom, I was like, okay, I really need to get my act together. And I've been a Christian forever, but I was like, I really need to go to church and get involved and get my kids involved. And so my father had that inclination. He actually, when he found out my mom was pregnant, he actually left and went to Jordan. He told my mom that he was going because my grandfather was sick, but the truth was he actually went to find a home for us. He had found a home and a job. He was gone for 3 months. My mom didn't know why he had left. She just thought that she was by herself pregnant. And when he came back, he told my mom, "Hey, I want to move to Jordan. I want to raise Lauren in my beliefs, with my tradition." And that's when things started falling apart a little bit. So that's when I started going back and forth between going to church one weekend and then going to the mosque on another weekend.
So even when your mom was pregnant, she was already being told by your father that he wanted to raise you in the Muslim faith. And so when you were born, was their marriage fairly, stable? And did you remember, having a pretty good, home life before your father took you?
So when all of this happened, my mom went into premature labor. I was born early because of the amount of stress she was under. She thought she had been abandoned. She didn't know when my father was coming back from Jordan because there was not a lot of communication. She had very good friends because she didn't have family in the Dallas area. So she really leaned on her friends during that time. Her friends showed up. Actually, Beverly Lambert's brother, Stan, he's the one that took my mom to the hospital and was there when I was born. My dad came back from Jordan about the time I was born. And that's when he told my mom that he wanted us to move to Jordan. So by the time I was 6 weeks old, my mom was filing for divorce. It was pretty quick. It was a pretty radical change in my father. You can imagine my mom at that time having her first child was very emotional, angry, and scared. And so she quickly said, this is not going to work. So she had a newborn baby and found herself as a single mom trying to figure out how to pay the bills, diapers, and formula. So that's how my childhood started. But that said, they had a really good relationship once they figured all of that out. My dad was very loving. Anytime my dad wanted to see me, he could. My mom had full custody, all rights for me, but I went and saw him every other weekend. And he remarried. He had 2 children with his new wife, and I loved going and spending time with my dad and my stepmom and my siblings. We had a great relationship. And so that's where it started, where one weekend I would go to the mosque with them when I was in their family, learning their customs. And I lived with my mom all the time. And so I had both upbringings.
Right, right. So they did have a cordial relationship after they divorced. And so it was and you enjoyed being with your dad and his new family, and then you were with your mom, for the most part during the week. And so tell us, Lauren, you were 7 years old when the whole trajectory of your life went into a different direction. So tell us a little bit about that day.
Yes. So everything changed in my life at the age of 7. My birthday is in September, and it was Halloween weekend. It was October 1987. My father asked my mom if he could take me trick-or-treating, and he promised my mom that he would get me back to school on that Monday. And she said, no problem at all. Yes, you can have Lauren for an extra night. Just make sure you take her to school on Monday. And there were no red flags. There was no warning signs. My dad came and picked me up, and I had my suitcase packed, and I had I was a cheerleader that year. When I started sharing my story and writing my book and sharing on the podcast, I found all of these photos of this time frame. And I had a blue and yellow cheerleading outfit with my hair in pigtails. My dad picked me up. I was excited to see my siblings, but he was the only one there. And I got in the car, and he told me he had a surprise for me. And he said, we're not going trick-or-treating. I'm actually taking you to the airport. We're going to Jordan so you can meet your family and visit where I grew up. And so I was shocked, and I was confused. And I said, Mom never told me we were going on a vacation. She said, you were taking me to school on Monday. Where's my stepmom? Where's my brother and my sister? And he began to tell me that my stepmother could not travel with us because she was pregnant with their 3rd child. And I would see them soon. Everything would be okay. My mom knew where we were going, but she didn't want to ruin the surprise. And I knew in my gut something was wrong, but why would I ever doubt my dad? Because your dad's not supposed to lie to you. Your dad's not supposed to hurt you. He'd never lied to me before that I knew of. And so I just had to trust him. So as we're driving to the airport and I'm questioning him, he's getting upset with me and just telling me, you'll see, Lauren, everything will be fine. But everything was not fine.
Right, right. So you got on that plane and he took you to Jordan, and was there a time when you did get to Jordan and you stayed with his family, I'm assuming, when you were there? And you kept asking, can I call Mom? Can I talk to her? did he make it sound like it was just going to be a temporary visit and that y'all would eventually go back home?
Yes. So he made it seem like it was a vacation. And when we got to Jordan, I had never traveled outside of the country. I'd traveled to Florida because my mom lived in Florida, but I didn't know Arabic. I knew very little. I didn't know how to speak Arabic or write Arabic. The culture shock. My father had a huge family and very traditional. The way I remember and describe the home, it's like a huge apartment building, and every family member lived in the same building, but they had their own little apartments, which was neat to be around that much family. But there was a definite difference in my dad. In Dallas, my father was very loving and kind. He would put me to bed. He would, brush my hair, get me dressed, read me stories, let me hang all over him. When we got there, all of a sudden, it was my aunt's and my grandmother's job to take care of me, which I didn't know them. They were strangers to me. They mainly spoke Arabic, a little bit of broken English. And so there was the language barrier. And then all of a sudden my father wasn't around because it wasn't his job to take care of me. It wasn't the man's job, which I didn't understand the cultural difference at 7 years old, but I felt it. The bathrooms were different. The food was different. Everything was different. We were being called to prayer 7 times a day throughout the city. You could hear it through the speakers. So I was going through a huge change, and I would ask my dad, when can I call my mom? When can I see my mom? What about my stepmom? Even if I could talk to my stepmom, that would have comforted me. And he just kept pushing me off. And he was like, Lauren, it's fine. You'll see. Don't you like it here? You're going to learn some new things. You're going to learn about my culture and my family. And the more I asked, he would get upset. And so I knew that something was wrong. I knew that I didn't want to make him mad. And I didn't know when I would be able to talk to my mom again.
So how long did you live in Jordan with your father's family?
I was there for 3 months. And the turning point for me, when I really knew that it was not a vacation, is when my father put me in school. I knew that this was not a vacation. That was the moment I thought, I'm never going to see my mom again. And this is my new life. I was going to school. I was learning how to read and write Arabic, and just getting into the daily routine, into the customs. And my dad just kept pushing me off. I finally was able to talk to my mom on the phone, but with very strict rules. And I actually have a cassette tape of the first phone conversation I ever had with my mom, which is really hard to listen to. I don't even recognize my voice. 1, I'm 7. 2, I had such a thick Arabic accent. And even in that short amount of time, and I felt so distant talking to my mother. But he had told me, don't say anything bad. Let your mom know you're okay. Don't question her. I'm going to be listening to your conversation. And of course, he did the same thing when he talked to my mom. That was one of the first times I was able to talk to her again. And it was right before Christmas.
Lauren, I can't even imagine you as a 7-year-old being plucked out of what you knew of life to be and into this foreign country, and you couldn't communicate with your father. He obviously wanted you to be happy in Jordan and to not ask any more questions and just accept that this was going to be your new life, and so I'm sure as a 7-year-old you really couldn't say a whole lot, and everything was internalized. And so I can't even imagine, your mom, when you talked to her on the telephone, you spoke differently too. You sounded differently. And so, so tell us about what was going on your mom's side. I know that she had started, had people praying. She already had people get in place to get a plan to get you back home. So tell us about that and how your mom was able to be successful in that.
So what do you do when you find out your child's been taken? An international kidnapping, and it's by their father, who is Jordanian. And so therefore, the mother has no rights as a United States citizen in Jordan. My mom went to the school that Monday to go have lunch with me, which was already a part of the God story. My mom didn't have time to go have lunch with me. If you're a single parent, you know how hard it is just to get there on time to pick up your kid. But that day she went during her lunch to pick me up. And when I got there, when she got there, she was looking for me. And the teacher noticed that, she looked confused. And so the teacher went over to my mom and said, Kathy, Lauren never came to school today. Well, she was mad because that was the last thing she told my dad, make sure Lauren gets to school. So this is in the 80s and there's no cell phone. So she went to a payphone and she called my dad's house and no one answered. And then she called my father's restaurant where he worked and they told my mom that my dad never showed up to work. And that's when that anger turned to fear. It's almost like the Holy Spirit was just talking to my mom right then. My mom had gone to Jordan before they got married. So this would have been 7, 8 years before this happening. And she remembered that the main airlines that flies into Amman, Jordan is the Royal Alia Airlines. And then the headquarters is in New York City. So standing at that payphone, she called the headquarters. And the lady answered the phone and my mom asked, do you have an Ollie and a Lauren on your flight reservation? And the woman said, I can't give out that kind of information. Well, then my mom's voice changed and she said, please, I think my ex-husband's taken my daughter. So the woman came back on the line and said, yes, I have a Lauren and an Ollie arriving in Amman, Jordan this evening. So that's the moment my mom found out that my dad had taken me. And in the fourth phone call, Beverly and Rick Lambert, if you know the Lamberts, is Miranda Lambert, the country singer-songwriter. She was only 4 years old at this time. I'm older than her, but they were our closest friends. Bev and Rick were my mom's family. My mom and Bev worked together. My mom actually worked with Miranda's grandmother. And at the time, Rick had just retired from the police department in Dallas, and Rick and Beverly had a private investigation company called Lambert and Lambert. And so that was the first person my mom paged, 911, emergency. So when Rick got that page, they called my mom and my mom told them, standing at that payphone, Ollie has taken Lauren. So Bev and Rick dropped everything. They were actually working together downtown Dallas that day. They met my mom in her townhouse in Richardson, and that's where everything began to fall apart, if you can imagine. They moved out of their house with Miranda, moved into my mom's house, and they stayed with her day and night until they put together a plan of how to get me back. And Rick called everyone he knew. The first thing he told my mom, thank God, because I have all of these cassette tape recordings. So as I've had this journey of speaking and writing a book, I've listened to hours of phone calls. My mom went to Radio Shack and put the recording device on her phone. So every time she called Jordan, she could hear any hint of where I might be. So I have all these conversations of my mom calling Jordan, begging, and then people are only speaking in Arabic, saying, Lauren's not here, Ollie's not here, and then it's all Arabic. And my mom is crying, begging, saying, please, I'm Lauren's mother. This isn't fair. You have to bring her back, please. And then the other phone calls were phone calls to the police and to the State Department and everyone they knew. And everyone said, we cannot help you. I'm sorry. There's nothing we can do. The United States cannot get involved. You may never see your daughter again. These stories happen. These things happen, but we can't help you. So it was no, day after day.
Wow. Oh, I'm sure your mom was being very tormented throughout this whole ordeal, but thanks be to God, she knew exactly when you were taken and where you were at. And that's not, a coincidence that, the Lamberts, they had a private investigation company. And so they kind of knew what you would do in this kind of situation. And so Lauren, your mom eventually, I know there was a team of people that went over to Jordan, and that I've heard you on a podcast before sharing your story. So tell us about that day when you did actually get rescued in Jordan.
Well, that was a huge God story. Nothing happened until my mom fasted and prayed. And the reason she did that is Beverly called my mom one day and said, Kathy, you have got to get away from all the noise and the chaos and the anxiety fear, and you've got to be alone with Jesus. And my mom agreed with her. And she went to a motel room in Fort Worth, and she was there for 3 days fasting and praying. And on the third day, God gave her a scripture in Daniel 10:12. It's where Daniel was fasting for 21 days, praying over the Israelites. And the angel Gabriel comes to Daniel. And the angel Gabriel says to Daniel, because you've humbled yourself before your God, your words have been heard. And then Gabriel continues on and says, but there is a war in the heavenlies. Like, that's why it took me 21 days to come and talk to you, because there's a war in the heavenlies over the Israelites. And God was telling my mom, there is a war in the heavenlies over your daughter. But because you stopped and you've humbled yourself before me, I have heard you, and you are going to get Lauren back. And so in that fasting, my mom was wrestling with God, and God showed my mom, you've got to lay down your cigarettes, because she was smoking, like crazy at that point, because she was so stressed out. And you've got to let go some areas of bitterness and unforgiveness that you have in your heart. So my mom just surrendered and laid all of it down, and she walked out of that room. And that is when everything in my story changed. I go into detail about how my mom found the men. It was a connection that she met a man named Al Zaponta at the grand jury when she went to the Dallas courthouse that day. Rick made that appointment for her. But Al Zaponta is actually the person that connected her with veterans, ex-military, Green Beret, Army Ranger, Delta Force. These men worked in North Carolina. They had formed a company called CTU, where they rescued hostages out of the Middle East. They'd never rescued a child, but they knew the Middle East really well. They had connections there. And so when Al reached out to them and told them about this single mom in Dallas, Texas that needed help, my mom flew them in and met with them, and they said yes. They said yes to a mission that was impossible. It cost my mom $80,000. And I found out after reconnecting, since podcast, I have interviewed all of the people that were a part of my rescue mission. I never talked to these men after the kidnapping, because when you go through something like that, we lived in hiding, we changed our last names. You don't go back and revisit that trauma. You just move forward. And so I never all these years reconnected with them. But since I've been sharing, I've been able to see them in person and hug their necks and tell them thank you for risking their lives to save my life. But they said yes, and they told my mom, we cannot guarantee your safety or your daughter's safety. We may not be able to get her back, and the United States will not help us if we're captured. And my mom said, I don't care. I want to do whatever it takes. And so they put together a mission to go to Jordan, and they had to find me. They had to find my father's home and figure out a way to get me out. And they had to have the right paperwork, because my father had my passport. Had to go to Washington to try to get a passport for me, a visa, border passes. There's so many God details that had to line up for this to actually be a success.
Right. No, it's a miracle story, Lauren, And so I know that the team was sent over there, and they found you, and you were able to come back home. Mm-hmm. And so you spent 3 months in Jordan pretty much then. Yes. So you were able to get back home. And once you got back home, did your father know that you were taken back? And
yes, he did. That's a little bit of a funny story. My mom was there for the rescue. They hijacked a school bus is how they got me. And the night before the hijacking, the night before the rescue mission, my mom had it enveloped, and she cut out pieces of paper in shapes of dollar bills, and she stuffed that envelope to make it look like it was ransom money. And she put a note in there, and on the outside, she put my father's name. And in the note, she said, "The eyes of Texas are upon you. Do not ever try to get your daughter back again." And then she signed it. So my dad knew that it was my mom that got me back.
Okay. So your mom was actually there in Jordan. when you were
Was
rescued?
there. That's another God story of how they found the home. My mom was in the floorboard of the front seat of the car while one of the men, Don, while Don was driving that car. Nothing looked familiar to her after all these years of visiting Jerosh. And so she got in the floorboard of the car with her eyes closed and she began praying, asking God, you have to help me find the house. I don't know how to find the house. I can't do this without you. And with her eyes closed, it's like the Holy Spirit began to show my mom exactly where to go. So she started giving Dawn directions, never opening her eyes or looking up. Dawn probably thought she was crazy, but he listened and he followed. And a few moments later, she finally looked up and she saw my dad's car sitting on the street, white car, Mazda with Texas license plates. And my mom froze in fear. And then finally, she was able to tell Dawn, I saw his car. We just passed the house, turn around. And when he turned the car around, he saw my dad walk out of the building. So that's how they found the building. But again, it wasn't until people started praying.
Wow, Lauren. I mean, God had his hand in every single detail to get you back home. You know, it literally was a miracle. And so when you did finally fly and you were back on U.S. soil, I'm sure it took you a while to kind of decompress from all that had happened, to you through those months. And what was it like finally? Were you just totally relieved and, or were you just kind of so torn because you knew you probably would never see your father again? I'm sure you had mixed emotions.
Mixed emotions. So when we first came back, the headlines were everywhere. Rambo mom saves daughter. I mean, I don't know how that happens, but she was on every TV station, Inside Edition, 700 Club, you name it. It was everywhere. And here we're trying to hide. So Beverly helped us change our last name, changed our identity. We moved every 6 months into different apartments until my mom had no more money. So she literally sold the last piece of jewelry she had to pay rent. And then we moved to Florida and lived with my grandmother until my mom had to reinvent herself. So it was us changing our last name. I knew that we were living in hiding. So there's all that fear. So the first few years, and I slept with my mom in her bed till I was 12 because I was scared. And every time that there was an alert out, if my dad came back to the United States, we would be notified. So there were several times I was pulled out of class, stay in the principal's office till my mom could get there. And so it was just this constant fear. And then, like you had asked, there was this, who is my dad? And why did he take me? And why is my childhood such a hot mess? Why did I have to have such a crazy story? And there was this, God, I know you're amazing to bring me out of Jordan and bring me home to my mom, but why did you ever allow this to happen to me? And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that question. Why do I have this diagnosis? Why did I go through this divorce? Why you fill in the blank? And that was my struggle and my, 13 years old, 12 years old, trying to figure out who I am and wanting, God creates us to desire relationship and desire the love of a father. And I mean, God is called father over 200 times in the Bible, but I struggled with that word father. I thought, how can you be a good father when my earthly father failed me? So that was my healing journey. Yes, it's a miracle that we got home, but boy, I was a broken kid needing a lot of healing.
Right. So you already you believed in Jesus. And so, but even after all of this traumatic experience, it's still hard to wrap your head around all that had happened. And so, and I'm sure you're feeling like your father truly, he betrayed you and he abandoned you.
Yes.
And so at the age of 13 and 14, is that when you really started, did you start acting out,
Yes.
just got rebellious and mad at God and mad at the world and, upset about everything that had happened to you? Rightly so.
Mm-hmm. Yes. How did you know? Were you hanging out with me? Yes, to all of those things. So, Beverly Lambert, she came to visit us, and we were back in Dallas by this point. We were in Florida for several years, but my mom wanted to come back to Texas, so we did. And she came to visit us. My mom had remarried, and that's probably a part of the hard part too. My stepfather was amazing. I say was because he passed away, but amazing. Like, he loved me. That was one of my little prayer journals. I even wrote prayers when I was young. God, would you bring me a dad? Oh, sorry, I get emotional. And he did. I mean, this the sweetest man. He loved me. He never disciplined me. He was a jokester, always laughing, always smiling, and he just loved me. And God knew that's what I needed. But even at that, I wanted to know my biological father. And so Beverly came to visit, and Rick, and they came to visit us, and she walked in the door, and she pulled my mom aside, and she was like, "What is going on with Lauren?" And Bev was like, "Something is wrong. She is not okay. The way she's dressed, the way she's, just the outward appearance." And so my mom, Beverly was like, "I want Lauren to come and hang out with us in Lindale for the summer. Are you okay with that?" My mom said, "Sure." And so I did. And that was the introduction to me, living in the house that built me. If you know one of Miranda's songs, it was a small little farmhouse. And I stayed there for the summer. And then my parents came, and Bev and Rick said, "Hey, we found land not far from where we live. I think y'all should move to Lindale. Y'all need to get Lauren plugged into the schools in Lindale and church here." And my parents, they didn't bat an eye. They bought the land. They built the house. They spent about a good year and a half driving back and forth to Dallas, to Lindale, building a house, working, you name it, so that I could have a better life. And living with the Lamberts, I lived with them for about a year while that house was being built so I could start my freshman year on time. That's where my healing began. Just getting plugged into church. I'd always been in church, but this was different. We went to Prairie Creek, and Beverly was a youth leader for the life groups. Life groups were little small groups where we would meet in people's houses. And being in those life groups around peers my age, letting those walls come down, those hard walls, anger, bitterness, and hurt. And I started speaking about it. I started talking about it. I started naming my hurt. That's where my healing began. But it wasn't until I started to do my own wrestling with Jesus.
Right, right. So you were still a teenager then when you moved to Lindale, and your folks had built this house, and then you started going to this life group where you had other kids your age, and you finally started feeling like, okay, I'm safe here. I can begin to talk about what has happened to me, and with those opportunities for you to be able to share, that let some of that heavy load off of you, and you opened your heart to like, okay, Lord, what are you going to do with all of this? What are you going to do with all of this? You could have stayed on that same path of destruction, Lauren, and just destroyed your life, but you had these beautiful friends who loved the Lord who just said, no, she needs Jesus, and she needs to have that time where you can process and start healing and start asking God the hard questions and being very sincere about it.
Yes, he wants us to surrender, and surrender is hard. And some of us may not even know what that stuff is. Like, we've stuffed it down so deep and so long that we don't even know what we need to surrender. And that's when we have to pray and say, God, search my heart, oh God, and make it clean. Show me what I've buried down. What is stopping me from healing in this relationship? And so, God was pulling all this stuff out. And during that time, you asked me about my dad. I wanted to know who he was. I wanted to know what he looked like. What did he sound like? Why did he take me? I wanted to know my siblings. I missed my siblings. I missed my stepmom, and my mom allowed me. I talked to him. We would write letters back and forth when it was safe enough. I would talk to him on the phone. He came for a visit. We met in a public area in Dallas at the Galleria Mall. So I did reestablish, or try to discover, who he was. And that was hard. It was scary. It was hard. It was hard to dig through all of those emotions. And I can only imagine, because I've got two boys now, like you said, what that was like for my mom to allow me to try to have a relationship with him. My mom was showing me how to forgive through her actions back then.
Right, right. I mean, that's your mom pretty much sacrificed, herself to allow your father to still have access to you.
Yes.
And your father, he never apologized. Y'all never talked about the kidnapping. You never
He
asked
did.
him.
So, well, and I actually have a whole episode. I talk about that. I did an episode last Halloween because this conversation happened. It was Halloween weekend. My dad showed up to our house in Lindale. And I mean, it's not like it's easy to find our house. We were in the middle of nowhere on 25 acres. And I asked him over and over again not to come, but I never told him why. I didn't want to tell him this is the anniversary of you kidnapping me. I couldn't say that to him. I just kept saying, I'm too busy. I can't see you. I can't see you. He showed up anyways. And I honestly believe that that was a God thing. I think God allowed that to happen because sometimes you have to get mad enough to be able to speak truth because I'm such a people pleaser. When he showed up at my house that night, that late afternoon, I could see him through the door because the door was glass. And all that fear from my childhood came rushing back. And I walked back to my parents' bedroom and I just said, Mom, he's here. And my mom could see that fear all over me. And my mom said, who's here? I said, Ollie, because I couldn't say the word dad. I couldn't call him dad. I said, Ollie is here. And my mom said, Lauren, I have seen you cry. I have seen you hurt long enough. It's time for him to see. You need to tell him how you feel. And I just, and the Holy Spirit just shows up and just gave me this bravery and the strength. And I said, you're right. I was probably about 17 at this time, 18. So I went back to the door and I let him in. And my mom I know she was in the bedroom praying. And I said, hey, we need to talk. And we sat down in my living room. And I said, do you know what today is? And he had no clue. So for the person that's listening that deals with unforgiveness, if you think that you being angry and mad is hurting the other person, it probably isn't. It's just hurting you. My father did not even realize that that was the anniversary of him kidnapping me. And so I told him and I asked him, I said, why did you take me? When you took me, you ruined my life. You ruined our relationship. You caused my childhood to be so broken that we had to live in hiding. And then I told him, you cost my mom $80,000. And then I asked him, do my siblings even know that that's why I'm not in their life? Do they know that there's a movie made about our story because of what you did? I let it all come out, all those questions. And it was healing for me. It was just, like I needed to get it all out.
Right. And your mom, she definitely had a close walk with the Lord and she knew what needed to happen because she could see it, that you needed to express all of that. So when you did finally, your father did finally apologize at some point for that. And so you were able to form this new relationship with your father, as a...
Sort of. I tried. We tried and tried and tried some more throughout my college years. And I finally just got to a point where I've realized if he could really acknowledge, really understand what happened, I needed to let him go. And so through my adulthood, I really didn't have a relationship with him. It was too hard. So I put up those boundaries. And then after my stepdad passed away in 2018, I probably hadn't heard from my biological father for 10 years. He actually, my biological father, he reached out and found my mom through the internet and got a hold of her. And I walked into the house one day and my mom said, your dad called today. And I was like, my dad, because my dad had passed away. And he goes, no, Ollie had called. And I was just in shock. And so my mom handed me the phone number. And at this point in my life, I'm a mom and I have kids. I'm living in San Antonio, started my career. And I've learned, always pray. Do not speak. Do not call, do not have a conversation until you pray. So I put that number in my phone, in my pocket, and I just prayed and prayed and prayed. I said, God, why? Why now? I just buried my stepfather. Why is my biological father now showing up? And I feel like God was saying, Lauren, it's your turn to tell your dad that you've forgiven him. And so I was driving home because as a mom, my quietest place is my car. So I dialed that number and I heard that accent and my heart started to race a little bit. And I just told him, I said, I want you to know I've had a great life. I'm a wife and a mother and I have a great career and I forgive you because I believe in Jesus and Jesus died on the cross for my sins. So who am I to not forgive you? I am no longer angry with you. I am no longer upset with you. I forgive you for what you did. And then I told him I had an amazing stepfather that raised me. And so it was just like that. God was allowing me to close that door. Now, I don't know. My father's still alive, so who knows what God's going to do? God is still working. I don't know the end of that story, but
Is he still in Jordan then?
I'm not sure where he is, to be honest. I don't know.
Didn't know if he had moved back to the States, but I mean, praise the Lord that God gave you a stepfather who knew Jesus and who could help walk you through just the unforgiveness part and how to deal with the anger and the trauma that you had. And it sounds like, as a young adult, you started just being able to release that to the Lord, and he enabled you to forgive your father for what he had done and how he had disrupted your whole upbringing practically.
Yeah, the Bible says, 70 times 7? It is so hard to forgive. I don't want anyone to hear this and think it just happens. It is a journey, but forgiveness equals freedom. So if it's 70 times 7, you just continue and you just say, God, I don't know how to forgive. I don't know how to loosen up my grip on this anger, but God will slowly help you and release you and walk you through it.
Yes. And you are so right. Forgiveness is not easy, and it truly is a thing that you have to cover in prayer, and the Holy Spirit is going to one day enable you to say, I'm no longer mad and I do forgive you, and you begin to see that person that you've been so angry at in a different light, because all of us are imperfect, Lauren, and your father, whatever reason, you'll never understand why he did what he did, but he obviously, wanted you.
Yes.
And so, but he just did it in a very
A wrong way. And I agree. It wasn't to hurt me. His intentions were good, as messed up as they were. Yeah, and I think if we asked him, he'd probably say that was the biggest mistake, because look at all that he lost on the other side of that.
Yes. And so now your mom, she's still alive.
Yes.
And she's doing well. And so y'all have a very close relationship. And so
We do. I really felt strongly God calling me to share my story. I never, ever thought I would do anything like this. But, I prayed. I remember sitting in my chair 2 years ago, and I felt God say, Lauren, it's time for you to write your story. Don't just hide it in a box. This didn't just happen just for you. It happened so you can share what I did in your life and the healing journey. And so I'm like, okay, God, but you got to show me how to do this. I don't know how to write a book or how to speak on a podcast, or I'm a soccer mom and a physical therapist. But through that journey, my mom had to relive this, which is not easy. We would talk about it. We would take a break. We would talk about it, take a break. There were times I thought, Mom, if this is too hard, we don't have to talk through this. And Beverly, I would call Beverly and Rick, and pulling all the pieces together. And it's been a healing journey for both of us to be able to share. And my mom's been my cheerleader. She's like, no, this is what you're supposed to do, to bring glory to God, to remind people that there's purpose on the other side of that pain, and that God can walk you through any kind of situation. And that faith, her big story is that faith over fear. If she had let fear drive her, I would not be sitting here with you today. It was the power of prayer and faith.
Right. Oh, your mom, I would love to meet her one day. So sounds like a remarkable woman who just loves Jesus and and, is allowing you to be able to share your story, because it is hard for your mom to have to go back and relive and remember, those hard days. But like you said, I think bringing up the pain definitely, the power of the secret is broken when it's spoken. So, there's no secrets anymore, and it doesn't hurt as much, and I think the Lord lets us be able to unload that. So yeah, tell us about the memoir that you have that you're currently publishing. You do have a book that is fixing to be published.
I do. I have a manuscript, and the manuscript is done. This has been quite the journey. Don't know how to write a book and do all the things. And so the manuscript is complete. I am working towards finding a publisher. I've had an offer this past week. And so just praying over all the doors being opened. And I'm going to be speaking with the She Will Conference. It's a women's conference that tours, and I'm doing some speaking engagements. I got a chance to speak to a group of teens, of girls, about father wounds. And to stand on a stage and to speak about something I struggled with at that age was so powerful, because I can relate to those girls. Growing up in a broken home, not knowing your father, no matter what that looks like. Maybe you have a father that lives in the home, but they're not present. Verbally abusive, physically abusive, alcoholic, you name it. A divorce where the dad's not around anymore. Those wounds, they hurt deep. But God can heal all of those wounds. And once we realize our Heavenly Father is so much better than, even if you have the best dad in the world, He's even better than that. Because God just wants to show you His love and His grace and His mercy. And that's where our identity has to come from, is what Jesus calls us to, who Jesus calls us to be, and who Jesus says we are. And so that's a big part of my message in my book. And when I speak, it's about forgiveness and healing those old wounds.
That's wonderful. Do you have a title yet?
It's a working title. Right now, it's stolen. I know. I wish. It is going to happen. Just prayer over this journey. I have a website. It's laurenbredeemed.net, where I have a lot of the interviews I've done with the Redeemed podcast. And so if you have people that want to publish, you can reach out to me. That's a great way to reach out to me.
No, that is wonderful. So yes, your website, it's laurenbredeemed.net, and you can find Lauren you're on Facebook, and
I'm everywhere
on social media, and
Instagram, Facebook. Yes.
And so, I think one of the keys to receiving what the Lord wants to give you that we never got from our earthly fathers, the key is we do have to forgive them and let them go. And I think at that point, the Lord knows what we were missing, and He can give us those things when we allow Him to do that and to fill us. And so, I know my relationship, my father is still alive, and I love my father, and I know he loves me, but we never have been emotionally close, and so, but I no longer resent that, and I see my father from a place of, I have more compassion for him, for the things that he's been through, and so I don't hold that from him. And the Lord's been able to bring other, father figures, and He Himself, has more than enough made up for that, Isn't
that freeing? It's so freeing. And that's why we talk about it. Like, I want everyone to know what that feels like. Like you said, like Rick Lambert, when I was the football sweetheart when I was in high school, he walked me across the football field. I will never forget that moment. I love my stepfather, but Rick knew me since I was a baby, and there's something about that. Like, you have this man in your life that's known you your whole entire life. Miranda and Luke were always willing to share their parents with me. And so God is so good to give you that, because He knows the desires of our heart.
Oh, I can definitely see why the Lord kind of tapped you on your shoulder 2 years ago, Lauren, and says, it's time to share. There's too many things that He's done, and how He orchestrated, how he got you back and how he led you through the wilderness to where you can finally forgive your father. And the Lord has definitely, brought his favor upon you, And so, I'm sorry?
I said, thank you for saying that.
Yes. And so, but yes, thank you so much for sharing. And, I know that there are a lot of us who do have a father-daughter wound, and let's not be afraid of exposing that wound and getting real with the Lord and being able to share it with somebody else that you feel, comfortable with about that emptiness that you have that was never filled from your earthly father. But we know that God can do immeasurably more than we can ask or imagine, and he fulfills and he heals those wounds, and our cup overflows, Lauren. And I can just see it in your countenance, like, oh my gosh, how much you love Jesus and what he's done in your life, and you just want to pay back and just honor him and just share your story with the world. So thank you so much.
That's why I get so emotional when I speak, because it's just, God, you're just so good. And when I start to talk about some of the things God's done in my life, it's hard not to get emotional. So I'm like, well, I just cry.
That is okay. Thank you so much, Lauren. And so that wraps up today's Getting Real to Heal with Dr. Grace. And we will see you the next time. Bye now.
This podcast is made possible in part by Express Employment Professionals, the leading staffing agency in East Texas, helping thousands of businesses find the right employees. If you're looking for a job, visit expresspros.com to learn more. If you enjoyed this podcast, visit deepintheheartministries.com/podcast, where you can find all previous episodes, subscribe to our channel, or leave a suggestion for future topics. You can also email Grace at drgraceenglish.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.